So thanks for being here again today. So we are in our last conversation where we're going to be talking about best practices for prototyping. I'm also going to pull in questions as they are asked, so make sure that you put them in. We actually have a running tally of the questions that have already been asked, and so we will pull some of those questions in again. If you put your name on the question, I will give you a shout out. If you don't, okay, I'll just, shout out somebody else's name that probably did it. So you can see who's joining me on the panel here. You can see their duty titles, but I am just going to jump right in to start with the questions. And in each question, the individuals will tell you a little bit about themselves, who they're representing, and then answer the question. So we're going to start with you, Scott. Scott, you're the Chief Technical Officer at Vannevar Labs. And I am good friends with some of your colleagues. So thanks again for being part of this panel today and supporting it. So I understand a little bit about Vannevar Labs and how they approach prototyping. I also understand it's a little bit different how they approach prototyping. But could you explain to us what that approach is, how it is different, and a little bit about yourself and Vannevar Labs, please?
Sure. Thanks. Happy to be here. So my background, I've spanned a lot of different types of technology development in the Department of Defense. Started my career at MIT Lincoln Lab, got a taste of like the FFRDC, kind of National Research Lab. Then I moved over to Palantir, wildly different company, working on kind of venture capital funded technology and fielding kind of high TRL technology to the warfighter. Then I moved back to a R&D, DoD R&D organization called Systems and Technology Research, doing kind of more government-funded, government-led research and development from like organizations like DARPA and AFRL and a lot of the traditional R&D organizations. Currently, Chief Technology Officer at Vannevar Labs, back on kind of the venture capital side, funding research and development myself with the objective of bringing commercial technology back to the warfighter. And so a lot about how we at Vannevar think about prototyping is how do we bring advances, particularly in artificial intelligence, but advances in commercial technology into a warfighting context. And so when I think about prototyping, I think a lot about there is a lot going on in the commercial sector in terms of technology development, particularly in artificial intelligence, that I don't think the government wants to try to replicate through its own R&D process. But that technology actually needs to be proven in an R&D, like a warfighting concept. You can't just take ChatGPT and say, go fight a war. That doesn't work. And so a lot of what I think about prototyping is how do we actually take these commercial technologies, build prototypes against real DoD missions, integrate them into hardware or larger systems of systems to be able to prove their worth, yes or no, in DoD contexts, in larger missions, in systems of systems where they need to operate. And so that when I think about that, we work a lot with like DIU or CDAO and a lot of these like non-traditional innovation parts of the government that are in the business of fielding prototypes to mission users and then evaluating them as to whether these technologies like make sense in a DoD context.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I appreciate that most of the conversation today about prototyping has really kind of been siloed. Like, the science and technology was done, and then the prototyping is done, and it's very disconnected from the user community. Yet, from my conversations with you and your colleagues, like you are doing the actual prototyping with the users as they are sitting next to you, implementing what you provide and providing that immediate feedback, and then you're pulling things in. So I think that's an interesting concept to think about. Hey, there's actually different ways of prototyping and different relationships in there. So Tom, Tom Moore, we've got representing the government. So on this panel, we've got a couple industry folks and a government person. I appreciate that you're here today. You're from the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Prototyping and Experimentation Office. You're the lead for Special Operations programs. I think when we think about Vannevar Labs sitting right next to the user, Special Operations program is probably, a little bit one step closer to typical prototyping, but you're still bridging that, very close relationship with the user because your user community is really small. Can you tell us a little bit about your office's approach to prototyping and how it might be similar or different to what we've heard or what we kind of envision in the prototyping?
I think it runs the gamut. Dr. Perkins was kind of my mentor for years and years and years, and he had a saying that we do dogs to satellites.
Wait a minute. You're prototyping dogs and you're prototyping satellites, or you're prototyping sending the dog to the satellite?
I had a dog program once. It was, I thought it was funny at first, and then it was probably one of the most fascinating programs I've had. We had ATF, Army, SOCOM, three-letter agency, and the LAPD.
But you weren't sending the dog to the satellite, like the monkey to the moon.
Prototyping, up the whole gamut.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. Cool. All right. I'll stop interrupting. Thank you. Please continue.
No, so
Dogs to satellites.
our office deals with inter and intra agencies besides the services and the combatant commands. Right now, currently, we're pivoting, shifting with the new administration. Our organization will probably change. Things will get canceled. Things will be consolidated. We're really waiting for confirmation and get some political pointies in for some direction, but there are a lot of things that transcend all the administrations. The warfighter always has problems, always has needs. We basically deal in the 6364 arena. Those programs kind of focus on, the first one is defense innovation acceleration. James Howell leads that. He used to be my deputy, does a great job, but they work on operational prototypes and advanced prototypes. The second is foreign comparative testing. This is at the TR level 7-8. Basically, foreign technology that fulfills a gap for the U.S. The last one is rapid prototype program. They do urgent needs. And then the last one is the acronym's called RADAR, but it's basically an experimentation effort to build the body of knowledge for a program to transition to, say, a service. And that's pretty much the foundation. There are a lot of cats and dogs around that that I won't go into, but if, for example, there was an event in the world that was unexpected and there was a need for a technology, we can do what we call quick reaction. It can happen very quickly. I think that's enough.
Yeah, no, that was great. And I picked up on something that part of your office helps evaluate foreign tech to bring into use in the Department of Defense. So if somebody had foreign tech and was representing a foreign company,
Yes.
that would be the entry point.
Sure. We're at the Australian Embassy next week.
Absolutely. Great. I think I saw somebody I don't see him anymore, in a uniform I did not recognize. So anyway, I'm not sure. Do you know, you just got
I
there.
saw him.
Yeah, okay. All right. Was he Australian?
Don't know.
Okay, all right. All right. Thanks so much, Tom. Appreciate it. James Chu, thanks for joining us today. I have been recently pleased to make your acquaintance, and I'm now on your email list, and I know how passionate you are about these topics. And so thanks for joining us. You work for Cadence. You're in charge of their aerospace and defense portfolio, but somewhere in your free time, you also find time to chair NDIA's S&T engineering division. So with that background, could you talk a little bit about what you do as the chair of that division, what that division does, what are some of their efforts, a little bit about what Cadence does? I know they do a lot in digital twinning, digital engineering, and then also how Cadence approaches prototyping, because I think that'll help set the stage, understanding the difference in how you guys approach prototyping to like suss out the best practices that each of you have. James, over to you.
Great, thank you. Usually, well, wow. I was just at a conference where they hooked me up and somehow a wireless kind. You ever walk into a conference room and you're speaking and you go right to the dead zone? That's exactly what happens to me all the time. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for being here. So, a couple of things. First off, I am the second chair of the Science and Engineering Technology Division. The first one died in place and he got a plaque, and my wife is waiting to receive her plaque. So really appreciate that. I've been doing it for 15 years because frankly, nobody else wants this job. But the reason why we're here and why we're important, we are a legacy division. We were the ones that originally put everybody together to say, here's where the opportunities are in science technology. I am a lab rat. I actually came out from Edwards Air Force Base. My father's one of the first rocket scientists that were hired by the Air Force to go out to Edwards, and I later became the chief of plans and programs out there. I cannot emphasize enough how important it is for the services conduct a coordinated science technology program with each other. Here's for a couple of reasons. It's the services actually know what the warfighter needs. I was there when, and I can't believe I'm this old to say this, but I was actually there when General Paul and Dr. Abrahamson redid the Air Force program. Admiral Gaffney, who I was working for at the time, and Dr. Saalfeld did the Navy program, and of course our good friends Marilyn Freeman and Mary Martin redid the Army program to all focus on warfighter needs. The nice thing about those 6 individuals that they were brave enough to actually take a look at what is going on in commercial. Now, how many of you heard of the program called Project Forecast? Anybody in here? Am I the only one that actually is old enough to remember that? Project Forecast was done by the Air Force, went to say, because we have learned in World War II that we have to somehow use technology to offset our adversaries' numbers. So they took a look, they identified, I think it was 7, Arun might be old enough, he, at his old job, used to read this type of stuff. He's just about as boring as I am. But these 7 key technologies they had to invest in. Microelectronics, materials, all this other type of stuff. And for the longest time, you guys remember there was an argument that was in the 70s and 80s saying the DoD needs to invest in this because, frankly, we've got to keep our technological edge. Well, something funny happened in the 80s where somehow the commercial technology said, hey, you know what? We can make money using this. And the big difference between a commercial industry, who I work for now, versus the Department of Defense is that if a commercial company or commercial industry, you think they can make money off of this, they dump a lot of money into it. The difference between the DoD and the commercial is that if it doesn't pan out, and they give you a short amount of time. How have you ever watched that disgusting show, Shark Tank? Which is not really venture capital, but it gives these clowns a forum. But that is exactly it. The fact is they give you a lot of money in a short amount of time and they kill it if it doesn't work. And that's the ruthlessness that you see in commercial, and it's something we don't see within the Department of Defense. Now, how many of you in this room think that the department still needs to evaluate the value of prototyping, or what we do in the commercial world, virtual prototyping, hard rack or digital twinning? How many of you think that that we still have to, that the department and the performers still need to evaluate whether or not it's good? Or you're just one honest person in there. Well, let me tell you something. The companies that take the 7 companies that make up this country, 60% of this country's GDP don't think so. Okay. We know that because they work with us. So the thing that, if you guys need further convincing, and my email address is pretty simple, JSBChew, CHEW at Cadence, CADENC.com. I will email you this report that came out called Leading Practices iterative cycles enabling rapid delivery of complex innovative products. And the GAO did this at the behest of the chair and ranking members of the defense subcommittees. And they said, yeah, this is what all commercial companies do. They don't build anything until they know it works. Now, why is that different than how you guys have been looking at prototyping? What do you guys think these guys actually use prototyping for? What do you think commercial companies do? This is the biggest difference in why we're seeing the hard time transitioning between commercial and the Department of Defense. There are no cost plus fixed fee contracts in the commercial world, okay? You actually have to put together a business case to the board of directors to ask for money to develop a new product. You have to prove to them, this is why this is going to be a crazy great product. This is how much time we think it's going to take to make. This is how much money they're going to need. This is how much is going to be a charge for it. And this is why we think we're going to be crazy great and it's worth the investment. You get the check and you get it out there. What happens when you go with the Department of Defense? Well, for good reason. Remember I talked about project forecasts? We had to share our risk. We literally were one of the things I was one of the biggest proponents of it. Being out living in Lancaster, I saw the B-2 being built. And I saw the space shuttle being built. And it was pretty darn impressive about how we had to invent stuff while we're developing it. That was the case. You don't have that kind of risk anymore. You have to put out, because in the commercial world, guess what's the schedule they have to meet? Christmas. You can't meet Christmas. You can't reschedule it, right? And if you miss it, it's a fatal event. So these are the stakes. So the things that I'm going to be focusing on, frankly, pounding on, because I'm about ready to strangle a certain defense company. I won't tell you their initials, but it starts with an L. But, where you sit there, you say, this group should advocate for a change of doing things. And that's get rid of cost plus fixed fee programs, go to fixed price incentive fee programs, and make it milestone payments. You guys would really be surprised the differences it makes and how decisions you make when it's all your money and you don't make a darn dime until you actually produce something. So I'll be getting on my high horse on that a little more too. And by the way, we Cadence are the ones that are driving this innovation. If you don't believe it, go out to that. Earlier today, I heard one of your speakers, when I was not being so rude and conducting business in the break room, but talk about this digital twinning center at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. That's Cadence. We stood it up. You guys now have the same digital electronic systems electronic systems engineering capabilities as the Magnificent Seven, and you have computational fluid dynamics capabilities that's considerably better than anything that the DoD has. Take full advantage of it. So thank you.
Thanks, James. Now, Scott, and I love having a conversation where you guys do all the talking and you debate each other. So, Scott, you leaned in because you wanted to respond to something that James said. So, respond away.
I just couldn't agree more with what he just said.
Well, that's
so I'm
boring.
sorry if I can't debate here, but yeah, cost plus fixed fee. I spent 8 years at a company doing cost plus fixed fee R&D, and I've spent now 3 or 4 years at Vannevar and 2 or 3 at Palantir. And the stark difference between how those companies operate, you would not believe when you're operating with venture capital money and you're watching a burn down chart where your revenue, your investment is just going down year by year, month by month, and you're watching I got a fixed fee contract, this is all the money I'm getting in. That lights a fire. You build the prototype, you get it out there, you do the digital twin, you make it work somehow. And cost plus fixed fee, I spend most of my time just keeping track of billable hours and how much my engineers were spending on which program and whether they spent the right amount on the right program, and very little to do with my PhD in artificial intelligence. And so I just couldn't agree more with we need to shift towards more build a prototype, prove that it works. You will get money when it works.
Right. And let me tell you a true story about this. So by the way, I'm level 3 acquisition professional. Anybody impressed by that? Nobody is. Oh, hey, another honest person. So this is a true story. So of course, we're going through DSMC, APMC, and we go to my how many of you know earned value management? We all go to earned value management class. So I didn't like this professor anyway, and I was bored. And so they says, okay, we're going to sit there. And this is why I've been kicked out of so many colleges. But they said, okay, I'm going to teach you guys earned value management. everybody go up there and list the steps on how to change a tire. So I looked at my group and we're all rolling our eyes. I said, I got this. So everybody else is listing the steps of changing a tire, right? Sit there and, jack up the truss. I change how a Formula One crew changes a tire. You guys know how Formula One crew changes the tire? A car rolls in, they stop it, they stick a hose in, their jack comes up, everybody goes, whoop, out. The professor said, I don't know what to do with this. I said, and that's exactly the problem with acquisition. Earned value management assumes you know what you're doing. And so you sit there and try to milk it for as much as possible. I've just changed the game. I changed the tire. The task was change the tire, and I just did it. And that's the thing you guys have to kind of realize. One of the things we talk about, you know how you can always tell when James gets Pentagon officials into cadence? We take them to our clients, and they always ask the same question. When they talk about requirements, you'll love this one. There you go. Well, a requirement, is that a threshold requirement or an objective requirement? What are you talking about? Though this is what I want, but this is what I'll live with. No, you got one number. You make it. And so they always go to the end. They say, well, what happens? You get to the end and you didn't make it. Do you back down now? Well, no, you make the requirement. You try to do it ahead of schedule, try to blow costs. And the question always gets asked, what happens if you don't? We get fired. And you can always tell, because after a couple of weeks on the third, on the power ring of the Pentagon, third floor E-ring outer, they say, hey, did you know in the commercial industry, people get fired if they don't perform? This is a real cultural change. How many of you know this has been legislated in the FY25 National Defense Authorization Act? This stuff is mandatory. And guess what your defense industrial base is trying to do right now? They're trying to evaluate it. Now, let me tell you real life, Varun knows this. I actually worked in the auto industry, but you didn't know that.
I didn't know.
Yes, I have actually worked for 2 failing companies in the auto industry, which makes me eminently distinguished to talk about this. Okay, of the big 3, only 1 actually humbled themselves and learned how the Japanese make cars. The other 2, you can't buy a car from them anymore. They only make trucks and SUVs. If you're in a defense industrialist company, you are staring at your future. How many of you read the Wall Street Journal?
While you look that up, I am going to pull in Tom.
I'm so sorry, Tom.
No. So I'm going to pull it. So because I want you to respond. So before we get to, because you kind of touched on like meeting requirements and like what a successful prototype is. It's like meeting requirements. But before we get to that, Tom, I want you to talk about contracts. Contract terms. So they talked about the importance of, and you're looking at me like this is because this was not on our list of questions
No,
that I was going to ask you, and I apologize.
Where are you going?
But like, so contract terms. So cost plus, is not inspiring anybody to do a great job. Incentive would. What are you finding as contract terms that work the best? Because we are trying to talk about best practices of prototyping. So let's look at the contract terms. What are some of the best contract terms that lead to the best outcomes in prototyping?
So I'm probably the wrong person to ask this, but because most of the work that I do is small business. And if I have to write a very strict, tight contract, I probably shouldn't be working with them. And there's a reason they call it R&D. The rest of our division works mostly with the services, and the services will pick kind of how they want to do it. Most of my stuff is LRIPs, low rate initial production. I don't do Cat 1s, and I work with my customer and I work with the contractors. So it's considered a team. And so you want to, there's certain things that, like the fee. The fee can destroy a small business. So you're looking for a contracting shop that charges a low fee. Things of that sort, just common sense, pragmatic stuff. But yeah, I totally agree with these guys. If I was heavy into that, absolutely.
Excellent. So let's then move on to what James was finishing with, and that is, what is a successful prototype? You were saying if it meets the requirements. So let's back up just a moment and ask ourselves, I'm going to ask you, I'm not going to ask myself. I'm asking you, can prototypes inform what those requirements should be? And how can you describe that or give examples from your experiences from your company on how that has worked?
Talking to me?
Yes.
You started me.
No,
Go
I'm
for it.
talking to Scott. You talk too much.
I tend to think about
I know.
in my mental model, I think there's like three stakeholder groups that I'm concerned about. There's the R&D community who's building the technology, thinking about the technology. There's the mission community, the co-coms that are actually running the mission. They're going to use and field this technology. And then there's the acquisition side and the requirement side of, I need to actually acquire and build and sustain this for the long run. And prototypes is about a three-way learning exercise in my mind. Is the mission wants to understand more about the technology that's coming down the pike. Requirements and acquisitions people want to know how to write the requirements and what they should be thinking about. And technologists like myself, I want to learn more about the mission and I want to understand more about what the upcoming requirements are. And so I think about prototyping as a three-way learning exercise. And just an example, so I'm working on a prototype sensor that I'm building on IRAD dollars, on my own dollars, but I'm working with DIU. And I was in Finland, actually, just 2 or 3 days ago, deploying that sensor with a bunch of Marines out in Finland. And I'm just trying, in my mind, just trying to connect my technology development with the actual mission owners. And you know what I learned? Putting a sensor out in negative 10-degree weather overnight kind of sucks. And that is not anything I would have learned. I'm worried about the artificial intelligence in the box, and does it detect the right signals, and is it operating right? And I had a bunch of bench tests that showed my probability of detection and probability of false alarm. But building a prototype, giving it to a Marine and saying, putting it underneath that tree for a week, I learned more than I was ever going to learn any other way. And so the mission people got a lot of feedback on, well, it's too heavy. I can't cart it around. How am I logistically supposed to get it here? I learned a lot about cold weather. And hopefully the piece that's really the hard one, the chasm of death to bring in, is the requirements and the acquisition to say, how do I get them involved here, which they're currently not. And I think that's a problem of, what did they learn in terms of what does this look like when you get to a larger rate production, or this goes beyond a prototype? And so I think DIU and CDAO, kind of some of the organizations that I work with, are getting really good at connecting kind of technology with mission. But I think we still suffered bringing in kind of the acquisition side to say, did they learn something from what we're doing? And are acquisition decisions being informed? Because I want to know that me sitting in the cold weather for the past week actually informed an acquisition decision. If not, I was just sitting in the cold for fun.
Yeah, and we've had a couple questions about how prototyping can inform requirements. So with the example that you just gave us, and I know it's just happened, but how is that information getting back to the requirements team to update the requirements to say, hey, not that you have to say something about like it needs to operate in super cold weather, but like, how are we including that in the future requirements that says, hey, we really should make sure that this works in cold weather or hot weather for that matter?
I think this is the gap that we suffer from a lot right now. Right now I view it as to your point of like, I have a burn down chart and I'm gonna run out of money eventually. That's on me right now. I cold call program offices and tell them, hey, I just did this thing with DIU. Would you be interested in hearing the results? Or, hey, the Marines I just met with, I say, hey, would you mind calling the program office and telling them what we did? Because I think they'd be interested. And so right now, it's a little bit on me as industry to try to tie these pieces together, because I think the government does struggle with this RDT&E over here, O&M over here. And that communication barrier, like the main reason I think Vannevar has had some measure of success is because we just don't accept that there's a chasm there, and we have to go fight to connect both of those sides. And it'd be great if the government spent more time being like, I'm doing a prototype and I'm actually talking with the acquisition officials to observe or to receive the output or receive the feedback. I wish I had a better answer.
No, I think that's great because knowledge sharing was something that came up in the research for the paper, and that we did not find examples of it being done very well. We'd like to find examples of it's being done very well so that then we can amplify those examples. But James, turning to you, you guys, Cadence is looking at digital twinning. That to me has to have a huge impact on proving out requirements or influencing requirements. Do you have any examples from your experiences with Cadence and how that is happening?
I'll give you a better example. How many of you
Absolutely.
how many of you guys have heard of a company called NVIDIA? By the way, I can send this link to you guys. How many of you heard of a company called NVIDIA? Little company. I think, how many trillion? I don't know. Anyway, so there's a really good video you guys should take that. First off, I want to emphasize what he said. One of the things that really get the, how many of you guys are Ted Lasso fans? What does he say? Be curious, not judgmental. Guess what happens in this department, in this industrial base? We're incredibly judgmental. This will never work. No way. You got to be curious. You have to, and this is why I can't stand the term evaluate. Let me go on a high horse. Can't stand the evaluate.
Did you ever come down from your high horse?
I'm getting a smaller horse. But, the thing is that you never, don't evaluate. Learn. It's pretty simple. I started off as a rocket scientist, and now here I am in defense and digital electronic systems engineering. Learn. You all smart people. You all have college degrees, right? Raise your hands. Come on. I mean, the thing is that you can learn. But here's a real example. So there's a video of Jensen going back to his undergraduate school, Oregon State University, and he talks about how, you'll love this, they were down to their last 9 months of life. You know what that means. Yes, you do. And guess what's the worst thing you can't keep in the Silicon Valley? A secret. He was working on GPUs, and because somebody got money, somebody heard about GPUs, somebody else was working on GPUs. He knew he and his company had to be first. And guess what else they had to do? It had to work right the first time, because you never have a second chance to make a first impression. And there was you can relate, there was a dark night, and they're kind of going, you know what? When we all trust each other, we're not getting any more money. We got to make sure this works. I hear there's somebody that's making something called an emulator. And this is risky, but it's going to take 3 months of our company life to buy one. But it's got to work right. So they did it. And that's why NVIDIA is around today. Emulate before you fabricate. They don't do anything now. They were the pioneers that made sure that everything on electronic systems today, and even a lot of physical systems, they don't build anything until they know the hardware and the software works. And then they say, let's go to it. Volvo. Guess how many cars Volvo crashes nowadays to make sure it passes crash tests before the standards, before they go into production? Anybody? Guess how many? 0. Used to be at least 10. 10 physical prototypes you crash is a lot of money. Now it's 0. Why? Because while we've been sitting there admiring the problem about prototyping, the commercial industry has been putting money into modeling a simulation to say, hey, you know what? Why do I have to do this? I understand material science. We have enough data in the back to populate these type of models. Why aren't we doing it this way? We talk about the need. He said something that I really, the commercial world, you've got a pretty interesting feedback loop. It's called sales. How many of you remember when these phones used to, one of the best apps out, I hope that's not my daughter asking me to pick her up. Somebody says I don't talk too much. Thank you very much. How many of you remember when you had one of these phones, you used to have an app for a flashlight? Remember that? What happened on the next generation iPhone? You got a flashlight. How about that? Get out there, be curious, talk to your end users. You'd be surprised. When we at Cadence, how we were able to get this stuff integrated, how many of you guys here own a Honda? If you ever own a Honda, go to the Honda Motors USA in Torrance, California. They've got a museum down there. The first floor is free. It's all the Honda products. They came to the US. On there has a quote from Mr. Honda. It says, always design your product for the person who's going to spend the most time with it. Think about that. And that's why one of our best friends is the current acting Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition Sustainment, Mr. Marani. Who spends the most time with the military equipment but the depots? Think about that. I'm over. Thank you.
No, so I am so glad that you're part of this panel because you make it so interesting. And so thank you for not getting upset with my ribbing, but your passion is just palpable and I really appreciate it. And so with all of that, I'm going to turn to little bit different subject that we have talked about before that we're going to talk about today. And that's about different organization models that do prototyping. And I know both of you have a lot of experience with that because you work with different organizations, but I'm going to start, Tom, with you. Because from a government perspective, these are like your brethren, these other prototyping organizations that support you in their efforts. What are some of the characteristics of what you determine successful prototyping organizations? And how can we replicate those organizations and what they do well?
I don't think there's one model. I think each organization has constructed the inner workings to adapt to the problem set or the mission. It varies. It definitely varies. Nobody's brought up security, but I work with one organization who where we would think something was very classified, it's sitting out and they're walking over it and they don't care. Where the mission is what they classify and what they care about. So it's I'm probably going to be a little bit more pragmatic in answering your question, but communication. That sounds simple, sounds like common sense, but if you're not communicating, you can make a lot of mistakes, spend a lot of money going down the wrong road. The other one is really knowing your customer. Knowing your customer, you can adapt your organization to serve that customer. So those are two.
No, that's great. I really appreciate the comment that successful prototyping organizations know their customer. So I really like that. Scott, question over to you.
Yeah, I mean, maybe echo that. I mean, I harkening back on kind of there's three stakeholders here, the mission, the acquisition arm, and the R&D and technology community. And the great prototyping organizations I've been don't have strong opinions themselves. They just view themselves as my job is to get all of you in a room and all of you talking. And I'm a bridge, I'm a connector. And that is my purpose in life. And I worked similar to Radar, the JCTD program. I worked a very successful JCTD program a while back, and it was with DIA, the COCOMs, and the JCTD office. And that went to production. It's been a wildly successful program, and I really credit it to, we had buy-in from mission owners out of the COCOMs. We had buy-in from kind of like a home organization kind of in DC, and then we had funding, thank God, from a prototyping organization. And that turned into success after success after success because of the bridge. And so I think a lot of organizations spend a lot of time thinking about, I want to get closer to the mission. I want to get closer to the mission. I want to get closer to the mission, which is really good. It's one part of the three-way connector. And I've seen a lot of progress made between kind of R&D-ish organizations, prototyping, and the COCOMs and the mission owners. But I've just seen less and less effort on the third part, the third leg of the tripod of, but acquisitions there needs to be a catch. Like, you do something really great, it impacts the mission really well. Who's catching it when it works? Maybe it doesn't work and there doesn't need to be a catch, but you need to be planning for success and thinking about those three things. And the great ones have those three parts.
I love that. So I like your comment about how the best prototyping organizations are facilitators.
Yep.
And then your last comment is also one of the points in the paper, aligning stakeholders and resources, right?
Mhm.
Somebody has to catch
Yep.
whatever the successful prototyping is. James, from your perspective and in dealing with different organizations, prototyping organizations in the department, where are you seeing some of the best practices done, and especially from the sustainment community? Because I'm aware that Cadence has made great inroads with the sustainment community and looking at some of these programs and how to support them as they are the depots, you've mentioned them, how they're supporting these existing weapon systems, which we don't necessarily think of need to have prototyping activities, but certainly they do.
I mean, one of the reasons why we learned it, and I think we've all know, it reminded me, I was at the Farnborough Air Show last year, where they were celebrating the 50th anniversary of the F-16. And it occurred to me, I was in 7th grade when that first flew. Now, when we teach a class, we actually, under Department Defense Acquisition University sponsorship, we actually teach a Digital Engineering 101 class. And we talk about how the elephant in the room is that the department never throws stuff away. When I was in kindergarten, growing up next year, Edwards Air Force Base, this bomber called the B-52 was flying around. 30 years later, I'm in the Pentagon, part of the team to certify that airplane to fly 100 years. And now that we're re-engineering it, do you think we're getting rid of it? You don't. So where it comes down to is the guys who have to make things happen. There's always those unsung heroes, the maintainers, the guys in the depot that say, I have to maintain a certain operational readiness rate. And something funny was starting to happen there is that, the worst thing, when I was an undergraduate, I was forced to take a statistics class. But there's a book out there called How to Lie with Statistics. I hope you guys all read it. And you have to, again, be curious, not judgmental. Whoa, we have an operational readiness rate of this system of pretty close to 1. You used to have 1,000 of them. Now we only have 300 of them. How is that happening? Because all those systems they couldn't fix, they just got rid of. So they kept the operational availability. Never look at total force, right? They're looking at operational availability. And then you took a look at why are you throwing those things away? Well, we can't find the parts anymore. With either the manufacturer no longer exists, or if they exist, we can't bribe them enough to make a certain number of parts. Well, what happens? They have to increase that. Well, we're going to have to think of a different way of doing things. So that's what we're doing now. We're teaching them using the DoD Trusted Supplier Network. Cadence is the only EDA company that's on that list. How many of you guys know that there's a Trusted Supplier Network right now that you could do all those electronic systems and never have issues for parts obsolescence or use commercial off-the-shelf? Thank you, Dr. McKenzie. I figured you would know. There is. You guys should look it up. By the way, there's a congressional mandate to use the Trusted Supplier Network when you do electronic systems. And usually it gets wavered away, but it's not getting wavered away anymore. The key here is that we talk about facilitation. The resources within the department exist now to be just like the Magnificent Seven. And that's a wild concept. And the neat thing about it is that those resources allow us to bring something back to the department we haven't had in a long time. And that's a smart buyer. Somebody says, no, I know about how long this should take, and I know it's possible to meet these things. I actually talked to, how many of you guys here own an OLED television set, flat screen OLED television set? So we were talking to Performer. It was a system that was supposed to last 4,000 hours. It was only lasting 400. And the chief engineer had the audacity to say, well, everybody knows that's an impossible spec. Everybody knows an OLED screen can't last 400 hours. And we said, we think anybody who owns an OLED television set might disagree with that. One thing I want to ask, I just want to put how many of you are government program managers? When you guys do this, or when you guys think about this, would you spend your own money on this stuff? Would you buy a product from a company, another product from a company that was crappy the first time? You wouldn't do it. So why do you accept this in the Department of Defense? Why do you accept somebody saying, I know these aren't systems don't meet requirements, but you can use them as trainers? Why do you accept that? That's a totally mind-boggling concept. There's a lot of goodness in here. And I'm inspired every day when I see how fast the government program managers and engineers are getting trained on these capabilities. And it's getting out there. And if there's something in the Wall Street Journal talking about how tech startups are getting to the Pentagon now. So for something for the defense industrial base, let me just remind you of this. We're in an administration where civil servants are getting fired. So do you think for this government, there's something called, there's such thing as, are such things in industries called you're too important to fail? Just keep that in mind. Thanks.
I appreciate that. I want to pull in a question. So I've been pulling in questions. I've kind of reworded them to the panel members. But this question, somebody put their name on it, so I want to give them credit. So Reed Skaggs, thank you very much for the question. He actually offered this question for an earlier panel, but I saved it for this panel. So I'm going to read it, and then I'd like all of you to take a stab at answering it. Can PEOs be incentivized to host annual competitive demonstration and prototyping events for small businesses and academia? These events could help improve or reduce costs with emerging technologies they may not know about. And please don't go with a yes or no answer. Think about like, how would this work? What would be the pitfalls? What would be the advantages and benefits?
This is how old I am. Okay. So when I first started in here, I'm so old that I remember the first time we tried to do an Iron Dome for this country called the Strategic Defense Initiative. So back then, when an acquisition, how many of you guys remember what acquisition programs used to be? They used to actually acknowledge when they had an ACO-1 program that technology might have advanced from the time we planned these requirements to the contract being awarded. So they had money for technology risk reduction. On critical things, they do that. For some reason, under the auspices of acquisition reform, we got rid of that. We need to bring that back. There's not, I see a lot of complacency today in the defense industrial base. And I think that maybe a little fear, probably not a bad thing, but that's going to allow, that means the government has to come back to be a smart buyer. You have to say, no, I don't accept this. I've sat in a number of government program reviews where the project officer says, well, they met spec. Well, how do you know? Well, because the performer told me so. Where's the data? Well, we can't get the data. Why can't we get the data? Well, because our contracts person says that costs money. Now, if you ask me, this is a real thing. And you go, what? And so this is why, little fear in the defense industrial base right now probably wouldn't hurt a little bit. And this is why I would love to see that come back. They should do that. I've been to the PEOs are that smart nowadays. So yes, I would heartily endorse that. And I would tell the PEO, and here's where we're going to start incentive. This is where we're going to start doing insertion programs at this point. So I would heartily encourage that.
And I think it links to the conversation that the Fireside Chat had when they talked about, hey, how can these big acquisition programs emulate the best practices of some of the innovative organization models? And so, Scott, I'm not sure what you've seen. Tom, like either one, you want to jump in here?
I mean, I would say, like, I think about how selection process gets done for a lot of these programs, and a lot of it, cost plus fixed fee, it's a proposal. I am going to, who can write better prose? Who can talk to what they could do if they were given an award? And then you're making a decision based on historical past performance, so that's legacy primes, or you're making a decision on who can write a more compliant proposal. And I often like to say, like, if the government had an AI need and OpenAI wrote a proposal to that, they would lose to a traditional prime because they don't know how to write government proposals, as well as the capture teams are many, many people with much experience in these defense primes. That does not lead to the best outcome when OpenAI wouldn't win a competitively awarded program in AI. And so prototyping is a really great way to do risk reduction and actually inform acquisitions. So you run a prototype and you say, who's actually performing here? Who's actually delivering the outcomes that we need? And then that goes into your selection process. And now the government has a much lower risk because they're getting proven technology, but also you're actually opening it up to the OpenAIs of the world to actually compete on a ground of who can actually produce the outcome needed. And so I couldn't agree more that prototyping is more needed in informing acquisition, whether it's done by the PEOs themselves or whether it's done by prototyping organizations that are the facilitators into those PEOs.
That's great. Tom, do you have any relationships with PEOs that are already doing some version of this? Or have you been seen it done in the past, and to what effect?
Yes, but on different levels, but Yeah, the, the thing that is most important is the data. Um, the individual that goes up and goes into the conference room and fights for your program against all the other programs, there's only so much money. So you want to make the cut list. The individual that's fighting for you has to have something to stand on. It can't be, might, maybe. That just doesn't cut it. So prototyping is very, very important. And anything you can measure, any type of data you can get to him, her, is really important. So,
I mentioned it when we were presenting the paper that I had a conversation with Doug Bush earlier this week, and he said, prototyping not only proves out the requirements, but sometimes it's what brings the requirements community and the user community to see that, oh, there's an opportunity here of what we could leverage out there. So we have just 10 minutes left. So I'm going to ask one question and then we'll do our speed round. So this is really focused on industry, but Tom, I'd like your viewpoint too. So many people complain about the time it takes to get things on contracts, the time it takes, you've talked about this, the time it takes to deliver things. What can industry do to help accelerate prototyping efforts? And it's also been mentioned, funding and CRs and things like that. But in that thought, should industry consider funding the efforts themselves so they aren't waiting on delays in funding for the government? Or are there other ways there are, of course, other ways to accelerate prototyping efforts. But what are your thoughts on what is industry's responsibilities and role in funding some of these efforts? James, Scott, either one of you want to take the first crack?
Well, I think a lot of the Silicon Valley companies do that already. It's just the nature, it's, you have to get something out there on your own nickel to prove that it works. There is no such thing as a physical prototype in the Silicon Valley. It's using hardware accurate digital twins and show it works. Okay, get it out there then. And that's a wild concept. Look at the construct we have today. You got DT&E and OT&E. Why? How does that make any sense whatsoever? Call it T&E. Why do you have to get to low rate production? One of the things we used to talk about when I worked for Boeing, when we were putting some stuff together, says, well, what's the production learning curve on that? And I couldn't understand what that was because I was a new college graduate. What's a production learning curve? Well, how soon will it be before we can make sure that the product that comes out is 100% compliant? And that's why I says, I remember that. I remember you're not supposed to buy a car that's built on Monday or Friday, right? Because that's when they get all the all the other workers in there. What do you think is the learning curve in the Silicon Valley nowadays? It's 100%. We talk about foundries, and I remember having to have this discussion with folks in the Pentagon. It's really easy to just do something nefarious to one chip. And then you find out, guess how many people are inside a modern foundry? When we teach this class, we show them a picture of TSMC. They actually had to turn on the lights to show a picture. It's all automated because for those guys, that's waste. Waste means lack of profit. So it's a profit motivation in there. So that's kind of where I think we really need to be going on here. It's a different kind of mindset nowadays. You're not trying to insert something into the current acquisition system. You've got to really take a look and destroy the current acquisition and bring them back in. And a plug for a friend of mine, Bob Lutz, who's 90 years old now, he wrote a book called Guts. Buy that book, read the chapter, The Patient Heals Thyself. And they talk about how that clarion moment, how they changed how they developed cars to make themselves the #1 car company in the world. Read that, and that's real acquisition reform that's going to have to happen. And we're trying to do that with hardware accurate digital twinning right now.
Awesome. Scott, I know
Yeah.
you've been waiting to jump in. So
just look at past. what are some of the most valuable defense companies out there that have been started in the past 20 years? You got your Palantirs, you got your Andurils, and you got your SpaceXs. All of them funded internally, research and development. They built things that they had conviction on, and they got it to market better. And our space launch industry is super competitive because of that right now. Our AI capability with Palantir is super competitive because of that now. Anduril is even earlier in their journey, and they're already a multi-billion-dollar company. This works where the government doesn't do cost plus fixed fee, but the government says, companies, you invest your R&D, you have conviction in it, you subsume the risk. It de-risks it for the government. It puts more of the risk on me and kind of what I'm trying to do. But that's why I fly to Finland. As I flew on Finland, I didn't have a charge code to fly to Finland. I flew to Finland because I know if that thing can work in a real world scenario, my hope is that the government will want to buy it and that it matters in a real world operational context. Now, there's a lot of people that call me naive in that if you build the better product, the government's necessarily going to buy it. And that's the part that makes me a little worried is we got to solve on the government side of, yeah, great, this didn't come through the government R&D process. This wasn't 6.1 to 6.2 to 6.3 to 6.4 linearly, like a company's interjecting with a finished piece of technology. And I think there's a lot of consternation about that inside the government. But I think we just look at Palantir, Anduril, and SpaceX, and I think the country is way better off because of them.
So Tom, Scott just said there's consternation inside the government about whether or not the government should be funding this path from science and technology through prototyping, or industry should be funding it and bring it in later on.
I think it's a mix. I don't think it's one size fits all. But I do agree, the previous speaker was talking about the government contracting system and was an art form. It's definitely an art form. I specifically go out and find people that are passionate about the mission in the contracting shops, because if you tie them to the mission and they're passionate about the mission, they want to award the contract. If they're just doing the 9 to 5, checking the box, you add on years. Same with finance. I send my finance guy out to demos and experiments, so he's tied to it. So he's just not coming in every day, checking the box.
Excellent, excellent. So we have one last question, speed round. If you oversaw all DoD prototyping and acquisition, what one best practice would you mandate to leverage the power of prototyping? Tom, we'll start with you and come back.
Our biggest problem is Congress. We don't have a budget. We're shutting down in a couple of weeks. We reopened the FY26. We're redoing pieces of that for cuts, and how many months are we in the year, and that flows down. I mean, it hurts companies. They have to keep talent on. You know, if they're doing a project, they have to keep that talent to do that project. So they have to get creative in, putting them on other projects and to sustain that until they get their dollars. And then we'll probably get it in May, and then in June they do sweep ups. So
you may not know my background, but I worked on the Hill for 6 years. And I worked for a member in the Senate who introduced a bill, and I thought it was brilliant, that if the appropriations were not passed on time, that then there was a reduction in the money that was allocated to each of the senators' offices. There was some sort of impact on the senators' salaries. And as you can imagine, this went nowhere. But I thought it was a brilliant piece of legislation. So, Scott, speed round.
Same thing. My background, I sat on one of Chuck Schumer's AI forum panels back in the day. And at the end of the session, they asked a general question to all the panelists: what is one thing Congress can do to help accelerate AI for the nation? And everyone said, pass a budget. There's no way that we can do strategic planning around artificial intelligence complete uncertainty as to what the budget's going to look like. So I advocate that. I don't have a clean, concise answer. Someone up here said more lawyers, or I had less lawyers on another panel of, yeah, I wait for contracting. A story that I love to say is I wrote an AI proposal in January 2022, 6 months before ChatGPT would come out. That contract got awarded 2 months ago, a year and a half after ChatGPT came out. How much relevant in AI? Like AI has changed so much. I just got awarded, and it's a 3-year contract to be able to deploy the AI into a classified environment and get my ATO. 3 years from now, we will have AI that was thought of in January 2022. That doesn't make sense. Those timelines don't work. And so hiring people on like ATOs and security officers and contract writers, like people that can actually, that's always the bottleneck, and they're always afraid of doing non-traditional contracting because they can stamp out a process that they have. It's an extreme bottleneck. So
Yeah. So Congress speed is what I'm
Yeah.
hearing you say. And James, we have 1 minute. Sorry, 1 minute, go.
There's one organization, the Department of Defense, that's exempt from congressional continuing resolutions, at DARPA. Blow it up, focus it all on that. Have them actually do something. What is it, $4 billion now? $4 billion? Come on, guys. Do something. This is important. This is what's really important to the defense. I don't know what else you're doing. Nobody else does either. But do this. There's my minute.
Thank you, James. Appreciate it. So thank you to this panel. I appreciate your passion. I appreciate all the comments and the honesty and transparency. Thanks for the audience for joining us today. Really appreciate that. If you would let me offer, before you pack up too much and make too much noise.
And before I get to this,
Oh, so I was supposed to offer thanks, but Arun, are you going to do the thanks? Arun is going to do the thanks, but my closing thought was going to be, in the paper, in the executive summary, we say, hey, we believe this is the start of a conversation, not the final word. And so I truly believe that. I know Arun truly believes that. And so we look forward to that conversation and connecting with you to continue it. Thank you from my standpoint. Arun, over to you.
thank you to this panel for pointing all the problems to all the places where I've worked in the past. It's my fault. So thanks everyone for coming. That's the most important thing. And please help us continue with the conversation. Thanks especially to Charlie Dalgas, Andral Dalai, and Anna Kim for putting this all together for us. Thanks very much for making it go so seamlessly. We will be putting out a survey on this event and on the paper. Please respond. It gives us feedback on how to improve things, or just find us, email us, tell us what you want us to do differently and better. And then third, please visit our website at ETI, the Baroni Center's website. We've got a lot of things going on all the time, webinars going on all the time. Sign up for our mailing list and you will be bombarded with all the great things we're doing. And again, that's also the way to tell us what you want us to do. So thanks everyone for coming.